was on self-defense and the defense of others, and self-defense allows the use of reasonable force to protect oneself from imminent harm. The privilege extends to defending others so long as the defender reasonably believes intervention is necessary. So, the things to consider are: was there an imminent threat, reasonable belief of danger, proportional force, um, and can't use self defense after the threat has passed. So, this is a complicated topic, and I think you see it a lot in domestic violence cases. Um, that's why you should definitely be careful about getting married and consenting. I think it's good personally. What do you think that there's not um, the kind of marriage common law? Well, where if you've been married for a certain amount, if you've been living together for a certain amount of time, you're considered married. Not trying to make a moral statement. I'm just talking about the legal kind of principles. I think morally or religiously, when you get married, you expect, if in the Christian faith at least, you expect that the man treats you, lives with you in an understanding way. Speaking from a woman's point of view, for a man, you expect the woman is going to behave in a biblical way, to be humble, respectful, like you should both be, that you live with each other in a loving way and not exacting things of each other, but with love and consideration. That's what you hope for in a marriage. But given that men are often stronger in general physically, and women have to use other tactics to defend themselves physically, um, that's a consideration. There was a situation. I'm going to talk about a couple of historical examples of things that happened and cases where women defended themselves and what resulted with that, as well as I just saw there are a lot of movies about real life taken from real life examples, and then some cases that I know personally as well. So, I mean that I know, like, contemporary cases of things that happened to people. So Elizabeth Packard was an American advocate for women's rights who was committed to an insane asylum by her minister husband just because she disagreed. So, obviously, again, from a biblical worldview, he wasn't, the Bible says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Then it doesn't say just men do it and women have to blindly follow, right? But some people use religion to put that on women, which is bad for their mental health because women are just as important as men, and they're human and they need to be able to think. Obviously, it's so silly for me to say this, but um, so she was committed there, and actually ended up found a lot of other women who were committed there. I know of someone who experienced that currently in contemporary situation. You would think, oh, we live in America, this doesn't happen here. And the judge really supported the husband. So, um, and insulted the wife, and he admitted her temporarily to a mental institution. So you need to be careful about who you marry, legally. And and her crime was she she fought for these legal reforms to be able to defend herself, and she did stay married to him and end up helping him in the long run. But that was all, that she disagreed with him about his religious and social views and fought for legal reforms against wrongful confinement. So she didn't take um, any violent actions against him. There are situations where they did, and the Mary Winkler case, where she shot and killed her husband. This is a movie, or this is so from the movie's perspective. It says that the prosecution argued she was involved in a financial scam. Um, so the way the movie portrays it is he got some check that was a fraudulent check. She didn't know it, and he had her set up an account without his name on it. She started paying bills out of it. She got into trouble. The bank required not only she come, but the husband come. He wouldn't come with her. So I don't know how they got away with arguing the financial scam if the movie is correct. That doesn't seem fair. But I would say that that is a good place for self defense. Some women have committed acts of self defense that I've seen when I've watched documentaries. From just what they've said, they feel safer in prison. Like they went ahead and took that step and ended the situation, and the person went to jail for it and said that they feel safer in prison than they do out there, because like if you get a restraining order, that's basically a piece of paper and it can make someone more angry. uh, Not saying that people shouldn't, I'm not giving any kind of legal advice, I'm just saying what I have seen happen, what's happened in history. There's the Ashley Benefield case where she shot. Oh, she was the Mary Winkler case. She was charged with manslaughter. And then there's also the burning bed case that Farrah Fawcett is in. That's a true story. I'll look at that too. But so she was uh, convicted of voluntary manslaughter, not murder, acknowledging there was abuse but still finding responsibility. She served a short term in prison and a mental health facility due to the jury's compromise, with some juries believing she was a victim. Yeah, so just because you're married doesn't mean you can't be a victim. And people do change, or can can be totally different before you marry them and after them, or getting under the influence of people. I've seen that happen. And um, so Ashley Benefield shot and killed her pastor husband, claiming a desperate act of self defense against severe abuse. Uh, she would have died if she hadn't shot him, and she was convicted of manslaughter instead. So there are laws. Here's one: the Survivors Act in 2024. I saw in a documentary that there's less harsh punishment for women defending themselves in an abusive situation than there used to be. It says allows courts to re-sentence individuals convicted of crimes where domestic or sexual abuse was a substantial factor, offering a pathway to reduce sentences or release for survivors, including retroactive relief for those already incarcerated. Modeled after New York's DVSJA, the Act provides a sentencing procedure to consider abuse as a mitigating factor, potentially capping sentences at 30 years. Okay, and the kind of abuse, physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, as a mitigating factor. So be nice to each other, because basically, um, and of course, in marriage, uh, I mean, that's a tight relationship. So, self defense is a foundational doctrine in criminal law. Okay, so this is the research paper that you have to write. Below is a sample on the topic: courts balance reasonableness and proportionality and self-defense claims. How that's gonna come to play, grounded in doctrinal sources and including a critique of current standards. Self-defense is a foundational doctrine in criminal law, permitting individuals to use force under certain conditions to protect themselves from imminent harm. At its core, courts evaluate two interrelated standards: reasonableness and proportionality, to determine whether the defendant's use of force was legally justified. So keep those things in mind. While reasonableness focuses on whether a defendant's belief about danger was objectively reasonable, proportionality assesses whether the force used was appropriate relative to the threat faced. This paper analyzes how modern courts balance these standards. I'm going to pause for just a minute and look up the burning bush case. I think that's no, that's a different one. Now, let me look this one up for you, and I'll be right back. Okay, so this a movie called The Burning Bush. Francine Hughes, The Burning Bed. That's what it was. Where Francine Hughes, after years of abuse, burned her husband's truck while he was inside. Okay, it shows in the movie like it was in the bed, leading to her acquittal by reason of insanity. That in the movie it shows the her attorney saying we need to say you were in, she had no intention of doing it, but he had just finished beating her up and he wouldn't let her go back to school to continue that according to the movie, but she was acquitted and not found guilty, so and able to return to her children and continue with her education and support her family. Okay, so those are some different cases as far as domestic violence goes. um In adjudicating self-defense claims, courts generally require that the defendant reasonably believe an imminent threat exists and that the level of force used was proportional. So those are the two things you want to keep in mind: reasonableness and proportionality of force. Here's an example: Brown versus United States. A defendant who reasonably believes they face imminent danger of death or serious harm may stand their ground without retreat and use force that does not exceed self-defense. While Brown helped articulate the reasonable belief requirements, courts also emphasize proportionality. Force must not be grossly excessive compared to the threat posed. Okay, so in the Brown versus United States, it's a landmark Supreme Court case. The incident was that the defendant, Robert Brown, shot and killed James Hermes, I guess is how you pronounce it, after Hermes, who had a history of violence with Brown, approached him with a knife. The issue, the lower court instructed the jury that Brown had a duty to retreat if possible, even if it meant danger, leading to his murder conviction. So he's convicted of murder for defending himself. The Supreme Court disagreed, holding that a person reasonably fearing death or serious injury from an attacker can stand their ground and use deadly force. Yay. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote that detached reflection cannot be demanded in the presence of an uplifted knife. Yes, you're gonna establishing that a person isn't expected to carefully weigh out options. I feel like you see that a lot in suspense thriller movies where the police the good guys have to like wait and cannot take action and defend themselves, which would definitely limit the amount of people who would want to have that role, right? So thankful for Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Thank you for that. Okay, I didn't talk about the Brown versus United States and how to remember it. Brown and ground, uh, and maybe Holmes and home. Brown, stand your ground, and then Holmes is like in the home can connect that together that he was the one. It's like, no, you're not required to have all this rational thought process when under threat. Okay, another case was this one here, State versus Leidholm. Summary is that a pivotal 1983 North Dakota case where a battered wife, Janice Leidholm, stabbed her abusive husband to death. So here's another one of those situations. Stabbed her abusive husband, claiming self defense after years of abuse leading to manslaughter conviction, overturned on appeal for improper jury instructions, with the court adopting a subjective standard for self defense in battered women's syndrome cases, recognizing her state of mind and past experiences as relevant to her reasonable belief in imminent danger, not just an objective, reasonable person standard. Yeah, okay, so I heard a man who supports women in domestic violence situation, a counselor type man, trying to explain to other people who haven't had this experience that other people think, oh, it should be easier for you to leave an abusive situation. No, it's totally the opposite because you've had your path thwarted. You know, normally you're in that situation because your support system isn't good, and you get out of that situation and you're what you think might have been good supports. That's when you find out who your friends are, who's really there for you. So Janice Leidholm stabbed her husband. The defense was that due to long-term abuse, the trial court refused to instruct the jury using an objective standard for self-defense, what a reasonable person would believe. Like when you've been tortured for years and put down and whatever else it is she went through, your mind doesn't work like people who haven't had that experience. It kind of reminds me, there were some neighbors who moved down the street from me and who had uh, escaped a communist country. Well, they're not as friendly or as trusting for good reason, right? They've had bad experiences. So, whereas we may take that as we in the United States who haven't had an experience of that kind of oppression might not consider that reasonable. It's definitely reasonable considering what they've been through. So the trial court refused to instruct the jury, and so the outcome was that she was convicted of manslaughter. Upon appeal, the North Dakota Supreme Court reversed the conviction, finding the jury instructions flawed. The court established that for a battered woman claiming self defense, the jury must consider her subjective belief that force was necessary, incorporating her history of abuse um, into the reasonable person standard. So, this ruling significantly advanced the legal recognition of battered spouses, allowing their unique circumstances to be considered in self defense claims, and that their perception of danger might differ. That would be a hard one to judge, right? Because if you're not, how do you judge? It would take having people from uh, having being judged by peers who have experienced that. That have questions about how that would play out. But so that's the State versus Leidholm. Maybe you can remember that by lead home. Like the defendant needs to lead you to their home to explain what was going on and how their thought processes. Also, I would think different people think differently in you know in situations like that. So how would you really find someone to judge you fairly? I'm not sure. Okay, so the common law approach required a duty to retreat. So we're going to look at that one. State versus